the first thing I always notice on Christmas morning is the light. It is a different light than any other day of the year, a soft, blue-white glow that seeps around the edges of the heavy velvet curtains, promising a world hushed and made new by snow. This morning, that light found its way downstairs before I did, painting silent stripes across the living room floor. I stood at the bottom step for a long moment, just breathing it in. The air was thick with the smells I had spent days building. The rich, dark scent of the standing rib roast slowly warming in the oven, the sugary ghost of last night's gingerbread house, the sharp, clean perfume of the noble fir tree standing sentinel in the corner. From the old record player in the corner, Marvin Gaye's voice was a low, soulful hum, asking a question about mercy that seemed to fit the sacred quiet. I had built this morning, piece by piece, like I was constructing a cathedral. Every ornament on the tree had a story. I could tell you the year Amara, now 8, had glued the lopsided popsicle stick star, or the time KJ, at 5, had decided the ceramic angel needed a mustache drawn in permanent marker. The garlands of popcorn and cranberries we had strung together, their needles pricking our fingers, our laughter echoing in this very room. It was not just decoration, it was our tactile history, a map of our lives together hung with care on fragrant branches. The thunder of small feet on the upstairs landing shattered the silence. A thrill, sharp and sweet, shot through me. This was the moment. "They are coming," I whispered to the waiting room. Amara and KJ exploded into the living room, a whirlwind of flannel pajamas and sleep-tousled hair. Their eyes, wide with the pure, uncomplicated magic of Christmas, scanned the room, skipping over the bulging stockings to land on the two large, awkward shapes standing side by side beneath the tree, shrouded in my best linen sheets. "Grandma, what are they?" KJ demanded, his little body vibrating with anticipation. "Patience, my love," I said, my heart swelling until I thought it might burst. "Patience makes the reward sweeter." My son Marcus followed them down, his smile a little weary but genuine. He gave my shoulder a squeeze. "You have outdone yourself again, Mom. The place looks incredible." And then came Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She moved with a different kind of energy, a silent, assessing glide. She was already dressed in a crisp, cream-colored sweater, her makeup flawless, as if she were attending a board meeting instead of a family Christmas. She offered me a tight, perfunctory smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Everything looks very coordinated, Viola," she said. Her gaze swept over the room, and I knew she was counting the calories in the cinnamon rolls, calculating the potential for mess. I pushed the thought away. This morning was not for her, it was for them. I turned back to the children. "Go on, then." With a whoop, they tore away the sheets. For a breathtaking second, there was only the sound of rustling fabric, and then a shared, gasping silence. Amara was staring at the 3-story dollhouse. It was not a flimsy, plastic thing from a toy superstore. It was a solid, wooden replica of a Victorian home, with a wraparound porch and real shingles on the roof. I had spent months on it, painting each tiny window frame, wallpapering the miniature rooms with scraps of real fabric, furnishing it with little chairs and tables I had found at a dollhouse miniature fair. It was a world in miniature, built with love. KJ was on his knees before the hand-carved wooden train. The engine was a deep, polished mahogany, its cars connected by strong magnets. Each car was different, a coal tender, a boxcar, a caboose, and each was intricately detailed with tiny metal hooks and latches. It was a toy built to last, to be passed down. "Oh, Grandma," Amara breathed, her voice full of awe. She reached out a tentative finger and traced the line of the dollhouse's roof. KJ was already pushing the train engine along the floor, making a soft, chugging sound under his breath. This was the feeling I had worked for. This was the connection, the spark of wonder that bridges generations. I saw myself in Amara's wide eyes, remembered the feeling of my own grandmother's handmade quilts, the weight of that love. I was giving them more than toys, I was giving them a piece of me, a touchstone of warmth in a world that was growing increasingly cold and digital. I caught Chloe's expression over their heads. It was not joy I saw there, but something else. A calculation. A disapproval that she was holding back, but only just. Her lips were pressed into a thin, colorless line. Amara looked up at her mother, her face radiant. "Look, Mommy, it has a real little staircase." Chloe's moment had come. She moved forward, her steps smooth and deliberate, a shark cutting through calm water. She knelt, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder and another on KJ's back, stopping his chugging engine mid-journey. "It is very elaborate, Viola," she said, her voice a cool, polished stone dropped into the warm pool of our happiness. She turned her attention to the children, her tone shifting into that firm, instructive mode I had come to dread. "Now, children, what do we say to Grandma for going to all this trouble?" "Thank you, Grandma," they chirped in unison, their voices still bright, but I saw a flicker of confusion in their eyes at their mother's tone. Chloe nodded, a satisfied little gesture. "Good. And now," she continued, her voice dropping into something more intimate, more insidious, "you need to explain to Grandma that you are too old for toys now. These are lovely, but they are for much younger children. You will be starting your coding robotics club after the holidays, KJ. And Amara, you have your advanced ballet intensive. You are big kids now. You do not have time for dollhouses and trains." The room did not just go quiet, it went cold. The warmth I had so carefully cultivated was snuffed out, as if someone had opened a window to a blizzard. I saw the light drain from Amara's face, replaced by a bewildered hurt. KJ's lower lip began to tremble. He looked from the beautiful, solid train in his hands to his mother's impassive face, trying to understand how something that felt so right could be so wrong. It was not just about the toys, it was a dismissal of everything they represented. My time, my care, my history. It was an erasure. Chloe was gently, firmly, peeling their small hands away from my own, teaching them that the love I offered was childish, obsolete. Marcus cleared his throat. "Oh, come on, Chloe," he said, forcing a chuckle that sounded brittle and false. "It is Christmas. There is always time for a good train wreck." He gestured weakly, as if trying to conjure a joke out of the frigid air. Nobody laughed, least of all me. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, and saw only a ghost of the little boy who had once spent entire afternoons building forts with blankets and cushions. He was a negotiator, always seeking the path of least resistance, a placater. He would not fight this battle for me. He never did. Chloe rose, her mission accomplished. "Why do not we see what Santa put in your stockings?" she said, her voice bright and artificial, steering them away from my offerings. "I think I saw some new tablet covers in there." The children went, their movements listless, their shoulders slumped. They were obedient, but the magic was gone. The joy had been leached from the room, replaced by a heavy, suffocating weight. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching them pull sleek, commercially perfect items from their stockings, gift cards, wireless earbuds, silicone phone cases. They were not bad gifts, but they were cold. They had no soul, no fingerprints, no stories. They were products, not heirlooms. The smells of the roasting meat suddenly seemed cloying. Marvin Gaye's voice now sounded like a lament. The Christmas lights twinkled mockingly from the tree, illuminating not a scene of familial joy, but a crime scene. A part of me had been vandalized, and the perpetrators were sipping coffee on my sofa, oblivious. I felt a profound, personal wound, a crack that started deep in my heart and spread outward. This was not a simple disagreement. This was a war for the very souls of my grandchildren, a battle between warmth and cold, between memory and oblivion. And as I looked at Chloe's triumphant profile and Marcus's averted eyes, I knew with a chilling certainty that I had just lost the first skirmish. The snow continued to fall outside, sealing us in a perfect, silent, beautiful prison. And I understood that the greatest gift I could give my grandchildren would not be found under any tree. It would be a fight, and it was a fight I now knew I had to win. The silence in the house had a physical weight to it, a cold, dense presence that had settled in the days following the holiday. It was not the quiet of peace, but the stillness of a fracture. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, the absence of the children's, laughter a palpable ache. The weekly dinners, the cornerstone of our family life for so many years, had been canceled. Viola's brief, polite text message was a wound that had not stopped bleeding. "I do not think I am up for hosting this week. Perhaps another time." There was no another time specified. The door had been closed, softly but firmly. Marcus felt it too. I could see the strain in the set of his shoulders, the way he would stare out the kitchen window, his coffee cooling forgotten in his hand. He was a man stretched taut between two poles, and the tension was tearing him apart. "Chloe, we have to do something," he said one evening, his voice low and weary. We were in the living room, the television on but unwatched, a flickering blue light against the gloom. "It has been over a week. She will not answer my calls. She just sends me to voicemail. I looked up from my book, a prop I was not reading. What would you like me to do, Marcus? Apologize for wanting our children to be respected as individuals. It is not about that, he pleaded, running a hand through his hair. You know it is not. It is about family. Those dinners, those stories, that is her whole world. It is how she connects with them. You saw how hurt she was. And what about my hurt? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. What about the children's feelings? They are not dolls to be dressed up in the past. They need to be prepared for the future, a world where they will be taken seriously. Your mother's ways, they are sweet, Marcus, but they are holdovers. They do not always translate. His face hardened. Holdovers? You mean our heritage, the things that make our family who we are? I mean a burden she is placing on them without their consent? I stood up, the argument taking a familiar, painful path. She tells them these elaborate, sometimes frightening folk tales as if they are gospel. She insists on traditions that have no relevance to their lives here. I want them to have a clean slate to define themselves. Is that so wrong? A clean slate, he repeated, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. You want to wipe away their history, my history, that is what you are saying. I am saying I want to protect them from being weighed down by a past they did not choose. I defended my position, but a cold knot tightened in my stomach. The words sounded harsher out loud than they did in my head. We were speaking in circles, each conversation driving the wedge deeper between us and Viola. The following Saturday, the day that should have been filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of chatter from Viola's house, was unnervingly quiet. Marcus had taken the children to the park, a feeble attempt to fill the void. The silence in my own home was oppressive. I needed a distraction, a task to occupy my hands and my mind. I decided to finally tackle the spare room, a repository for all the things we no longer used but could not bear to throw away. In the corner stood an old, leather-bound trunk that had belonged to Marcus's father. It smelled of camphor and dust. I told myself I would sort through it, perhaps find something to mend the rift, an old photo of Marcus as a boy, something to remind Viola of the bond we all shared. The trunk was heavy, and the lid groaned in protest as I opened it. Inside, a jumble of memories lay dormant. A military uniform, faded and neatly folded, a stack of school report cards, a box of tarnished silverware. I began to lift the items out carefully, the fabric soft with age. At the very bottom, tucked beneath a folded wool blanket, was what I was looking for, a large, ornate photo album. As I pulled it free, my fingers brushed against a rough edge along the interior lining of the trunk. It was a slight tear in the fabric, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. But something felt odd. There was a thickness there, an inconsistency. Curiosity, a nervous and prickling feeling, got the better of me. I slipped my fingers into the tear. Instead of the hard wood of the trunk's base, my fingertips met something else, a small, bundled stack of papers. I carefully worked them free. They were letters, a dozen or more, tied together with a simple piece of twine. The paper was crisp, modern, not old at all. The handwriting on the top envelope was familiar. It was my own. My heart gave a single, hard thud against my ribs. I did not remember writing these letters. I certainly did not remember hiding them. I sat back on my heels, the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. With trembling hands, I untied the knot. The first letter was addressed to my mother. The date was from nearly 2 years ago, shortly after Liam had started kindergarten. I began to read. The early words were mundane, updates about the children, about work. Then my eyes found a paragraph that made the blood drain from my face. Marcus is still so entrenched in his mother's world, I had written. He cannot see that her constant meddling is a weight on the children. All her stories and her old country superstitions, I feel they are holdovers from a burdensome past. I want more for Liam and Sophia. I want them to have a clean slate, free to become who they are meant to be, not who Viola's traditions dictate they should be. The words were an echo of the very argument I had just had with Marcus. But here they were, in my own hand, private thoughts I had shared only with my mother. How had they ended up here? A terrible, cold suspicion began to form. My mother was a meticulous woman. She kept everything. She must have what? Returned them? For what purpose? It made no sense. I shuffled to the next letter, dated a few months later. The words jumped out at me, each one a small, sharp betrayal. I have been gently discouraging the children's obsession with Viola's side of the family, the letter read. When Liam came home, talking about some silly folk hero she told him about, I explained it was just a make-believe story, not something to take seriously. I think it is important they understand the difference between fantasy and the real world they will need to navigate. I do not want them clouded by that sentimental nonsense. Another letter, more recent, the cultural festival at school was a perfect opportunity. Sophia wanted to wear the dress Viola bought her, but I suggested the new one from the department store was much more comfortable and pretty. She agreed. It is a small thing, but these small things add up to a larger perspective. I must be the one to guide them toward a modern, forward-thinking life, even if Marcus does not understand. I could not breathe. The room tilted around me. These were my words, my private frustrations and fears, but seeing them laid out like this, separated from the context of a confidential conversation with my own mother, they looked cruel. They looked calculating. They revealed a campaign I had not even fully admitted to myself, a quiet, persistent effort to create a distance between my children and their grandmother. But the most chilling realization was not the content of the letters. It was their presence. I had never sent these letters. I wrote them by hand, a habit I had to organize my thoughts, but I had always torn them up afterward. I distinctly remembered discarding them. These were my drafts, the raw, unedited versions of my feelings. Someone had retrieved them from the trash. Someone had saved them. Someone had hidden them in this trunk, in a place only Viola would think to look. The front door opened downstairs, the cheerful voices of Marcus and the children floating up the stairs. "Mommy, we are home, we fed the ducks." I scrambled to gather the letters, my hands shaking so violently I could hardly stack them. I shoved them back into the hiding place, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my chest. I had not sent these letters, but Viola had found them. She had read them. She knew everything. And she had chosen to say nothing, letting the cold silence speak for her. The fracture in our family was not a misunderstanding. It was a chasm I had dug with my own words, and I had just stumbled into the hole. The silence in my house after I found the letters was a physical presence, heavy and cold. It pressed against the windows, smothering the cheerful glow of the neighborhood Christmas lights. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the worn leather of the old letter case feeling like a dead weight on my lap. Charlotte's words were not just ink on paper. They were a ghost's breath on my neck, a reminder of every sacrifice, every tear, every ounce of strength it had taken to build this family from the ashes of loss. And Marcus, my own son, the boy I had raised with these stories humming in the background of his life like a familiar hymn, had agreed to lock it all away. The betrayal was a sharp stone in my throat, but the deeper cut was the intention. It was not merely a personal slight. It was an attempt to sever my grandchildren from their own roots, to prune their family tree until it was nothing but a skinny, unrecognizable stick with no history to give it strength. I knew I could not sit with this poison inside me. I had to face them. I did not call. I simply drove to their house, the box of letters on the passenger seat beside me like a solemn companion. The lights were on in their neat, modern home, a picture of suburban peace that I now knew was a lie. I could see the shimmer of their Christmas tree through the large front window. Marcus opened the door, and his face, so like his father's, shifted from surprise to a guarded tension in an instant. "Mom, what is going on? Is everything all right?" "No, Marcus," I said, my voice quieter and steadier than I felt. "Everything is not all right. May I come in?" He stepped aside, and I walked into the warm, fragrant living room. Chloe was on the sofa, folding laundry, and she looked up with a polite, wary smile that did not reach her eyes. The children were not in sight, probably already in bed. The stage was set. "Viola, this is a surprise," Chloe said, placing a tiny sweater neatly on a pile. I did not sit down. I held the letter case out in front of me. "I was looking for the recipe for my mother's fruitcake. The one you always say is too dense, Chloe. I thought perhaps I could lighten it up for the children. I found this instead." Marcus paled. He knew exactly what the case contained. "Mom, we can explain." "Explain," the word cracked out of me, and the calm I had clutched on to began to splinter. "Explain what? Explain why you lied to me. Explain why you agreed to hide these. These are not my letters, Marcus. They are yours. They are your history. They are your children's birthright." Chloe stood up, her spine straight, her hands clenched at her sides. It was my idea, do not blame Marcus. I asked him to do it. Why? The question was a raw plea. Why would you do such a thing? What is so dangerous about where you come from? It is not about danger, Viola. It is about burden. Chloe's voice rose, sharp and strained. It is about the weight of all that pain. I lived it. I know what it does. My family, we held onto our past like a life raft, and you know what? It kept us drowning. The stories of being poor, of being looked down on, of struggling and scraping, it did not make us strong. It made us bitter. It held us back. I will not let that happen to my children. I want them to look forward, to their future, not backward at a past full of struggle. I stared at her, the truth of her fear dawning on me, and it was a tragic, misguided truth. Oh, Chloe, you have mistaken the symptom for the disease. The poverty, the prejudice, that was not caused by remembering our past. That was caused by an unfair world. Remembering our past, our people, our victories, however small, that is what gave us the strength to fight that world. You think you are protecting them by hiding the struggle, but you are only making them vulnerable. A tree with shallow roots is the first to fall in a storm. Marcus stepped between us, his face anguished. Mom, please, Chloe is just trying to protect the kids. The world is different now. They do not need to carry that baggage. It is not baggage, it is ballast, I cried, turning on him. I carried it for you. I carried the memory of your father who worked 3 jobs and died too young so you could have a chance. I carried the spirit of my grandmother Charlotte, who wrote these letters to a daughter she would never see grow up, so that we would never forget the price that was paid for our very existence. And you were supposed to carry it for your children. You were my heir to this history, and you gave it away. The confrontation spun on for an hour, maybe more. Voices were raised, tears were shed, mine hot and angry, Chloe's frustrated and defensive, Marcus's torn and guilty. Decades of unspoken tensions, of polite disagreements that masked fundamental differences, surfaced in that brightly lit room. Chloe spoke of her own childhood Christmases, bare and tense, haunted by bills and resentment. She admitted she saw my traditions, my stories, not as a gift, but as a chain linking a new generation to an old misery. She had interpreted our family's resilience as a pathology. The fire of my anger eventually burned down to a bed of aching coals. There was no victory in that room, only exhaustion and a devastating clarity. We had reached an impasse built on love and fear, 2 forces that should never be enemies but so often are. We did not hug. We did not make promises we could not keep. I left them there, standing amid their perfect Christmas decorations, the box of letters tucked under my arm. The silence in my car on the drive home was even heavier than before. The following year was long and quiet. Phone calls with Marcus were polite but strained. Visits with the grandchildren were careful, orchestrated events. I decorated my tree alone that next December, my hands trembling as I hung each ornament, each one now feeling like a potential landmine. The joy had been leached from the ritual. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and clear. I sat in my quiet living room, the tree twinkling, feeling the emptiness of the house more acutely than ever. I was sure they would not come. And then, a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Chloe standing alone on the porch. She was clutching a small, poorly wrapped gift, her knuckles white. She looked smaller, stripped of her usual defensive certainty. Viola, she said, her breath making a small cloud in the frosty air. May I come in? I stepped back, wordless. She walked in and stood uncertainly before the Christmas tree, its lights reflecting in her eyes. I have been thinking, she began, her voice barely a whisper, about what you said, about the roots and the tree. She held out the clumsy gift. This is for you. It is not much, I made it. I took it and unwrapped it. Inside was a simple wooden ornament, hand-painted with a shaky, childish depiction of a strong, deeply rooted tree. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Chloe swallowed hard, looking not at me but at the tree. I was wrong, she said, the words clearly costing her a great effort. I was trying to build a future on a foundation of silence, and it is not strong. It is hollow. She finally met my gaze, her eyes glistening. I do not know the stories. I am afraid of getting them wrong. Will you help me? Will you tell me about them? Just one. Start with one. My heart felt like it would break out of my chest. I pointed a trembling finger to a delicate, hand-blown glass bird, cobalt blue with a tinge of silver on its wings. That one, I said, my voice thick. My father gave that to my mother, Charlotte, the first Christmas after they arrived here. He told her it was the color of the sky over the island on a clear night, a sky full of hope. Chloe leaned closer, studying the ornament as if she were reading a sacred text. "Tell me," she whispered. And so I began. I told her about the journey, the fear, the hope. As I spoke, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Marcus, holding the hands of our two grandchildren. They filed in quietly and sat on the floor near the tree, their eyes wide. They were listening. Marcus's gaze met mine, and in it I saw not defense, not guilt, but a cautious, desperate hunger. The story wove a fragile thread in the silence of the room. It was a beginning. It was a Christmas Eve miracle born not of magic, but of painful truth. And as I finished the first story and my eyes moved to the next ornament, a seashell from a long-ago beach, I knew the hardest part was yet to come, because the next story was the one about losing everything.